Hi Phil, thanks for joining us today. First of all, tell us a bit about your background and how you came to write your book.
I think you could probably describe my background as a bit of a patchwork career throughout. So I kind of grew up in the West Country in a rural community, but then I went on at the turn of the millennium to do artificial intelligence as a Bachelor of Arts degree. I was kind of advised against that at the time, which was interesting. And I kind of wandered through architecture, chartered surveying, 3D rendering, these kind of things, until I ended up in a digital online media planning buying agency working on a database.
Okay.
That was around 2008, 2009, and that's when I kind of picked up the data bug, as it were. I was offered after some time there if I wanted to sort of start a business, be the CTO of a startup. Sounded pretty good to me. And we started to build a new kind of data processing and technology around time series and analytics and those kind of things. And I did that for 5 years and decided that I wanted to change the way I approached my career in technology. So I'd been a programmer for 15 years up to that point, but I decided to give that up.
Okay.
And I gave that up by joining Microsoft UK, which may sound like a strange choice to people, but I decided I wanted to focus more towards people and technology.
Okay.
Now, during that transition, I had the privileges of lecturing at a course called S2DS. And this is a course for data scientists transitioning out of academia with PhDs and things like that into industry. And I kind of happened across this topic of empathy for technologists. And so I was working away, lecturing away those things, and that was all fun. But then I was approached by my co-author, Noelia, who just asked me outright if I wanted to write a book about this. She was doing some work with a publisher at a time. And I said yes, because I kind of got into the habit of saying yes to things. Most people in technology kind of go no a lot. And yeah, we started working on that book together and drawing together our experience of working with people and data and all those things into the book that, well, everybody has access to today.
Perfect. Before we start talking a little bit more about the people element, let's start with the data side of things. So this is quite a big question, quite broad, but why do you think data is so important and so topical today?
So I fundamentally believe that data is a change to the way that we know things. It gives us new things to know and new ways of knowing those things.
Okay.
This, in philosophy, this would be the school of epistemology, if you will. There's people who study the change in the way that we know things. And I think data is that significant. It's as significant as the printing press or the emergence of the internet or those things to change the way that we can know things.
Okay. So in your book, you write that people are the gatekeepers to the success of data, and that obviously goes back to the element of people and data working together. So what do you mean by people being the gatekeepers to data? What does that mean exactly?
So this is all based in the CEO of the startup I was part of. He said to me once, I think it was in a fit of pique maybe, that technology is the easy part, it's people that are hard.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuck with me as a programmer, sort of working out what that actually meant. And I kind of discovered, sort of on the travel through my career, that no matter how good your technology, no matter how much data you've got, no matter how clever the people working with that data are, the project will fail because of the human factor.
Yeah.
So that's why I say that people are sort of the gatekeepers to success with data.
Okay. So there's a lot of talk about bias in data, and how do the people impact that, and how do you start to remove that bias with, people acting on the data, not just interpreting the data and then moving on to AI models, creating AI models which then have to do something with the data. How does that impact things?
Bias is an interesting topic. There are many, many kinds of bias that can be built in. So we hear a lot about racial, gender bias and these kind of topics, and they're very important topics for people to work on. But there's also things like positivity bias
Yeah.
and developer bias and all of these things. And from my experience, bias needs to be managed. It's not something you actively remove because it's in there in the fundamental way that things work. People have a great capacity to sort of spot and manage patterns. When used positively, they can navigate very effectively and, you know, in business, in work, in these things. When it's used negatively, people call it bias. And so you kind of need people on both sides. You need to accept that people are the root of that bias within the data sets. And then on the other side, the people working at it need to learn to manage it. And they do that with sort of human level discussions and bringing more people in to discuss how to manage it.
Yeah, okay. So I guess some of that is, we were talking about it before, about the first thing people complain about is data quality, and there's obviously quite a lot of bias in data quality, so, or the perception of the quality of data. So how can people get over that stumbling block and that blocker where people say, okay, the data is poor quality, which could be just the bias in terms of what they expect from the data? What is your opinion on data quality?
So all data has data quality issues.
Yeah.
The only data that doesn't have quality issues is data that's already solved the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
So if you come to a data set where everything is fine, it means somebody solved the problem before. So this comes down to, bias is a data quality issue, not having a big enough sample size is a data quality issue. There are many issues. I don't think that they'll be solved with a magic tool.
Yeah.
They're solved by putting the right attention into the process, accepting that all data projects will have a data quality issue to solve, whether it's bias, whether it's sample size or any of those things. And you just need to work the problem, and it's people who will work that problem. There won't be any sort of magic tooling for it.
Okay, so starting to pick up with a discussion on tooling a little bit. We work with a lot of people, and we get to speak to a lot of different organisations who are starting up their data practices. They know that from an organisational perspective, harnessing the power of all this data is very important to them. But somehow they come to us and say, you know, we're lagging behind, we're not quite sure. We've started to implement the tools, the technologies, the data lakes, the data warehouses, but we're not quite getting there in terms of unlocking the power of that data. Why do you think organisations find it so difficult to get started with a data practice or actually build a solid data practice?
I think they try and do too much too soon.
Okay.
It's easy to read articles and look at what other people are doing and feel like you're missing out. And you go, if I don't have 10 PhD level data scientists working on petabytes of data, I must be lagging behind. I don't think that's true. I think you need to consider doing things at your own pace with the data you have and the tools that you have available to you. So everybody's lagging behind if they start doing something new.
Yeah.
If you haven't already done it before, then you're lagging behind. That's just how you approach it. So don't look for 10 new hires and expanding your data sets massively. Look again at what you have available to you. You may have developers who can call pre-built models via APIs. You may have data that you've only looked at in one way. What happens if you look at it in another way? And you need to practice that process, and then you'll find yourself building up over time, solving new problems, finding new ways to use the data you have access to, and other people will look at you and think they're lagging behind.
Okay. So you just mentioned when starting up a data practice, often people say, you know, we need to hire 10 data scientists. We need to have that capability. We don't have those skills. There is a feeling that there is a skills gap within data, in the data field. What's your take on the skills gap or the lack of skills or the perceived lack of skills in data at the moment?
So I don't know whether it's a controversial point, but I don't think that there is a skills gap.
Okay.
I think that puts the problem in the wrong place. I think that there are plenty of people with plenty of valuable skills to apply to data and technology out in the market and looking for new roles and those things. I think the problem is with the businesses themselves. their hiring processes, their expectations, their ability to nurture people from the inside. So if a business were to ask me and say, we have a skills gap, I'd ask them what they've done to get more time for the people they already have.
Yep.
So if, as opposed to trying to hire a very expensive data scientist, maybe you need to hire a developer to give your development team more time to experiment. And there's something I've been saying recently, which is you should buy the pause, not the person, which is use that hiring budget to give yourself time to skill up and nurture the people you've got, because they know your business, they know your clients and your customers and these things. They probably need the opportunity to show you what they can do. Then once you have that foundation in those people, it will be much easier to bring in new people because you'll know where the real gap is.
Yeah. In terms of getting started then, most organisations, as you say, do have these people already. And if they're given the pause, which is probably about the same amount of time as it is bringing a new hire in, and by the time they get effective in their role, probably about the same amount of time if they were given a pause, an existing member of staff was given a pause to get started. But we often hear we don't know where to start. So given if we were trying to train people up or give people new roles or certainly evolve their roles into a more data-focused area, where should they be starting? Where do we direct them? How do we direct them? What skills are required from that perspective?
I'd probably consider 3 avenues to get started. The first one is to accept the fact that nobody in your business knows. Then you need external help. So there are lots of agencies, teams, consultancies, individuals and those people who can help you find out. So there'll be some experimentation and things there. So sort of buy in the help. The second one is to appreciate that starting anything new will take some research. So you're not asking somebody to solve the data problem right now. You're asking them to find out ways to start. If the business has no idea, there's a whole bunch of people there because you have a business. Some of them will be able to find out. Then the third way is to look at what other people are doing, but not in a kind of, I wish we could do that. And then ask them. I mean, there are plenty of ways of getting in touch with people. They might not tell you the magic that they did behind the scenes because there probably isn't any magic. There was some hard work and a good idea at some point. But just discussing how they went through that journey, people are remarkably happy to talk about these things. And so by all of those 3, kind of just accept the fact that you can't start by having the answer, a bit like the data quality conversation. You start by accepting the fact that you need to start. And then there is a different process you have to follow.
So how do you create a team and probably more importantly, an environment where innovation and experimentation is encouraged, let's say?
I think the word innovation has a bit of a brand problem at the moment. Lots of people are scared of that kind of, how do we innovate? These companies have been innovative, or this company's disrupting the space, or any of those things. But it comes down to the human factor. It comes down to this idea of empathy and listening and working with the people that you've got. Innovation doesn't come from a new bit of technology. It comes from the application of that technology. And that's always done by people. AI doesn't magically come in and wire up a new tool that you've bought from somewhere and transform your business. People help with that process. And so this is the sort of other side of the book. I've talked about data, and we've talked about data there, but helping technical people to understand what it is to have empathy, to develop skills in that area that enable them to do new things with new groups of people. And so you kind of get to this point after you've gone through that process where you go, now we need to experiment. And that conversation gets easier the more you help people work together, especially people from a diverse range of different backgrounds and experiences.
Experimentation is an interesting word because it can strike fear into some people and some organisations, particularly if you experiment, you don't know if something's going to be a success or not. So how do you think people should tackle or see experimentation as part of what they're doing?
It's part of that branding problem with innovation that I mentioned, that we must invest in getting something right. We can't really experiment. If we're paying for something where we think we know what we're going to get, that's what we want. We don't want people to mess around on the edges and try other things. That's a false premise, though. Every project has an element of risk. Every piece of work that's being done has an element of risk. There's a story I like to tell about a piece of consulting work I did where, when we sold the project in, we were promised this set of data. But the promise of data is not the same thing as data
having
itself. Having it. You only have the data once you have it. And so we started the project and they said, oh, sorry, this person's left their job. We don't know how to get access to that. And we want the same result with a different set of data. You're going, okay, we're going to need to work that out now. There's experimentation in there, but that wasn't accepted. And I think that fear comes down to who's taking responsibility and taking risk. So that's another human factor. You have to work with the person on a human level to help them through that fear, and listening to them, understanding them, trying out different ways of understanding them is important.
Okay. Do you think organisations can leap forward in terms of what they're doing and incorporating AI into what they're doing, or do they have to really start with the foundations first and work up to that point? Or are there shortcuts available to organisations to get there a little bit quicker? What's your view on that?
I really like this question because it would seem that the easy answer is yes, focus on the foundation. You can't leap forward. I disagree. The answer is yes, you can leap forward. And you see, when you unlock the human side of the conversation, when you start to get more people into the mix and you develop the ideas of empathy within a team and have a more diverse team, small ideas happen. People ask questions they wouldn't normally have asked before, and that leads to something which looks like a leap forward.
Yeah, okay.
They try something new that, maybe a developer you've been working with or somebody who's an analyst with the data said, I've really wanted to try these things, but we never have. And somebody goes, yeah, let's see what that looks like. And suddenly something is produced that looks like a massive leap forward. Now, I'm not saying in this, ignore the foundation totally. Yeah. Going back to sort of the more obvious part of that answer, that, to be able to do that, you have to have a foundation that allows you to iterate in these things. But I don't think you need to be scared of looking for the big leaps forward. You've got some data, even if it's in spreadsheets, even if it's in a filing system somewhere, you've got access to stuff now, and that's enough. That's enough to find a leap forward. Just try and apply things, get that experimentation rolling, and you really can. And then you'll work out what the right foundation is. You'll work out this foundation is needed, not that foundation.
Yeah, we found it very useful in helping clients get the confidence to be able to move forward with these things by solving a small problem. And using whatever's available on hand in whatever format, but solve that problem in a particular, kind of data-focused way. When we're showing, we're using data. This is what the result can be, and we've managed to overcome this problem. Can you imagine what it's like if we scale that up and do this properly? Yeah. And I think that's the key thing. It's addressing problems that people have, removing some pain points that they have in their lives. And in the business, and that gives them the confidence then to say, okay, we can move this forward and start to do more of this type of approach.
It is a great example because you're saying, what if we scale this, which in itself looks like the magical big step forward, as opposed to going, let's lay a foundation and then see what we can solve after that. You kind of, an architect doesn't sell you a picture of the foundations in the ground, they sell you a picture of the house. Sometimes you need to draw that picture.
Yeah, we almost call it like a lighthouse. It's something, a big beacon that everyone can rally around because they understand it. And when you start to talk about data quality and you talk about data warehouses, data lakes and the underlying technology, it can be quite opaque to people in the business. They don't quite understand it.
And I think there's a really core point in there. When you mention all those technologies, you're talking about a data lake or a data warehouse, and there's these things called data lake houses now, or data meshes, or all of this kind of stuff. There's so much technology out there that all of it is the right answer for something,
Yeah.
and it's all the wrong answer for something else. And so if somebody's passion project is to convert the company from a data lake and a warehouse into a data lake house, and it will be the best thing ever, and they don't have that lighthouse you talked about, they don't have the example of what they're trying to achieve, it will feel like the wrong answer. And so I often get asked, because, I don't know, I put myself in a position to be asked that question of, what would you recommend for us? And it's like, probably none of it, maybe some of it.
Yeah.
I'd recommend you tried things.
Yeah.
They go, yeah, but we can't just try doing that. And it's like, you can. You don't need to buy into the latest blog post or the latest thing that a giant company that's a completely different business to yours has used. You need to buy into the fact that they got there by trying things as well.
So that comes down to a little bit something again which you've mentioned previously. It's about almost like data purists who think that the answer to everything is just pure within the data, without looking outside of the context and outside of just the data sets. What are your thoughts on that?
This is a topic I'm extremely fond of, because we can open it up into a conversation from data to data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and these pieces, and people are looking at that journey over time that they're going on. So AI as an overarching field isn't really a thing. There's no one thing that can be pointed at as AI in that way. You have to think about the pieces that make it up.
Yeah.
And these people who talk about data is all you need.
Yeah.
What they're saying is that all other human context is irrelevant. We have enough compute and enough algorithms now that I can just study the data and I can understand.
Yep.
What they didn't realize there is what they're saying in that process. You've got data as an asset. In itself, it's an inert. It doesn't do anything. But then they bring in this idea of algorithms. Algorithmic research is very different from studying data. It's the kind of computer science part of things. So you're talking about two things there. And then you go, hang on a second, so choosing the right data to work on, storing it, managing it, developing the algorithms, there's something else going on there. And you have to bring in this idea of subject matter experts and domain experts into that mix. And you realize that they can't be right. You can't develop magical AI with just the data, and a few clever algorithms. You need all three, because it's only in the application of these things that you end up with anything real that shows a real change.
Yeah.
A lot of academic work that proves an algorithm works doesn't prove it on something that everybody can use. Mm-hmm. Other people have to come along and apply it to the domain. So there's people, the new radical empiricists, as they're sometimes called, with data is all you need. It's a lack of imagination. It's a lack of the sort of acceptance that they need other people. It's a very solitary art that they're trying to develop.
What do you think causes that? In terms of being so, I'm not going to say narrow-minded, but thinking, that is the only answer.
There's two answers to that question. The first answer is empathy, that obviously is one of the themes within the book. And people who are trained in a specialism, especially people who are deep specialists and desire that kind of technical depth, they sometimes reject the idea of human empathy for various reasons, that they can be a solitary force in the world. The other side of it is that I think education, especially specialized academic education, forces people into narrow channels, and they're not allowed to think at breadth. And people who think at breadth are scary and difficult, and they don't have the qualifications in everything that they're talking about, so how dare they? It would have to be a conference of 10 people who could get to an answer as opposed to one person thinking at breadth. Yeah. And so we need to look for people who are able to think at breadth. We need to think of people who can work with a depth specialist to help them bridge the gap between those two worlds. Yeah. And that takes a lot of empathy, a lot of working with people. Some people who like depth can be quite difficult. Yeah. But that shouldn't be a problem, because some clients are difficult, some artists are difficult, and there's always a team of people around them who can help apply what they're doing and do something magical with it.
That's interesting. It almost circles back to when we were discussing about the skills gap,
Yeah.
in terms of, is it a skills gap at all, and actually have we got the people who have a broad expertise, subject matter experts, and it's a case of giving them the time, giving them the pause, to give them additional skills that allows them to understand, or at least manipulate data, understand what the purpose of data is and how to use it and what to do with it.
I can give you an example here. I've worked with a company who will remain nameless, and I was working with their data science team.
Yeah.
This was part of working on the book and exploring the themes of empathy and learning empathy as a skill. I worked with them and we did a day's workshop for that. And then a year later, they invited me back. And I thought, oh, this is nice. They're inviting me back. They didn't, push in a corner. And they pointed to somebody in the team. They said, this person put their hand up after that and said they wanted to be something else.
Yeah.
They liked this idea of working with people and helping the team be more effective. And they stood up to develop in that way. Now they called themselves a data architect. And it was a big part of their job to go out and solve those human problems for the team. There are other people in the team who said, I'm here again because I've got some questions. I didn't really get some of the things you're talking about. We went through those and they were like, yeah, don't want to do that. I'm glad this person does though.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing, that those kind of impacts, the company decided to take that pause and to listen to the person who said, I enjoy writing code, but I also enjoy working with people. Can you help me do both things?
Yeah.
Then you go, this is a great opportunity to nurture somebody and to help them develop those new skills.
Brilliant. So in most organisations, well, in all organisations, there's just a huge amount of data, of different types of data. How should organisations know what data they should be focusing on first?
So this question is hard to answer because the best answer I can think up is hindsight.
Okay.
Which is the data that you want to focus on is the data that gave you the biggest gain and the biggest advantage when you tried to do something with it. But that's obviously not an answer people can implement directly. And it comes back to this idea of experimentation. We talked about experimentation being scary, that if you develop the muscles and the skills for experimentation, you can use that hindsight. Let's say you did 10 experimental projects with different data sets, and then 6 months later, somebody goes, that experiment we thought didn't work. Actually, that told us this.
Yeah.
And because we know that, that's now useful. And that's the cycle you want to build up. Because if you go, this large company used this technology to find these things out and they made 10% more revenue and we want to do that. Unless you're that business, that won't happen for you.
Yeah.
They got there by experimenting. So you're going to have to as well.
Okay. So when we're looking at different systems that we work with, things like CDP platforms, they are incorporating more and more elements of AI to automate a number of the tasks which historically would have taken a team or a number of people, hours or days to perform, and now the AI does it almost instantaneously. So there's a concern that these systems won't need people to operate. How much of a concern is that? And is it a case, again, of people coexisting with AI technology? And does that mean that the roles that people play or people perform now are going to evolve and change? And in what two do we think?
So I think there will always be companies who, and I'll say companies, while there are people within there, it's the business will decide that they're going to go all in on fully automated.
Yeah.
And so there will be tools that they'll be able to use to do that. People will sell them those tools and they'll make that decision and they'll look for that cost saving. If there's no longer a team doing it, we're paying this much per month for that tool, and that will happen. There are two problems with that. Those systems are always brittle because the development of that technology has no oversight. The business will then say, it's not working right, do something about it, as opposed to really knowing why it's not doing something right. Then they will get beaten by the people who have people working with that technology. And we'll kind of steer clear of the sort of socio-technical and cultural and sort of societal aspects of, AI making all of those decisions, and come back to the point that it will always be the case for our lifetimes, at the very least, that people plus AI will always beat AI alone. But the roles of those people, just as you said, will need to evolve and change. So we'll go from, if we take an example where people are making decisions about how to buy individual adverts on television.
Yep.
People are deciding how to buy sets of adverts in a targeting group. People are deciding which AI algorithms to use against a particular scenario to deal with a particular problem. And that's an evolving job.
Yep.
The nature and the skills of that job changes, just as we can talk about something like copywriting,
Yep.
or we can talk about image generation and these things. Right now we have a situation where we have media stories about AI wrote this article.
Yeah.
Okay, AI put the actual words together, but then there's always a little piece in there that says, and then our editors or our curators or something like that built the article out of parts. Okay, let's focus on why those people existed in the first place. It's because the algorithm didn't do as well as you're pretending it did.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the case for CDP platforms running with AI, that they will tell you that they're brilliant and they'll talk about the gains you can get, but there will have been people involved.
Yep.
That will be another case of nurturing. We talked about it with data work in itself. Nurturing people through those changes in their roles will be very important for business, because you'll never lose that need for domain expertise.
And the curation task or the curation role is that it's having the subject matter expertise to know when something is good and when something is bad or something is in between. And so I guess that is something that roles are going to evolve in, is reviewing the outputs of these algorithms and AI models. Yes. And things. Okay.
And it is an art in and of itself.
Yeah.
The ability, because there'll be tremendous scale there. If you're generating 100,000 images, you can't look at every one.
That's what I'm going to say, yeah. And I guess that's where tooling comes in to try and highlight exceptions. So, this is the 10% at either side. These are the exceptions, and that's what the curator needs to look at in terms of, okay, how far do we need to take these things?
Exactly, and that skill, you'll notice that skill will develop.
Yeah, okay.
And they'll start to feed back into the development of the next wave of that technology. But they'll be the experts. Suddenly you'll have people going, I don't know how you do what you do, but you control the algorithms better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's the skill they're developing. They won't know necessarily how to write the next algorithm, but they'll know how to control them. Oh, if we do this, if I push it in this direction too far, in 3 generations it will be bad, so we won't do it.
Yeah. And it's that feedback loop of saying, okay, this has been the output of this algorithm, and these are the good bits, these are the bad bits, and we need to try and, in the next iteration of it, we need to try and reduce the bad bits. Okay. So when we're talking about tooling again, and this is again a very broad question, what are the components that an organisation should have in terms of building up the foundations for their perfect data technology stack?
I want to subvert your question. I'm going to say
please
data
do.
technology stack starts with people.
Okay.
Starts with skills in empathy. Because, as we mentioned before, there are so many bits of technology, there are so many ways of processing data, that some of them will be right and some of them will be wrong. If you want a great data tech stack, it's going to need to be a tech stack that developers can work on, the team can evolve to do new things with, that you can experiment with, and that when you look at the market and you do choose to hire people, there are skills in the market that you can hire for that. And for some businesses, a good old SQL relational database will be the right answer.
Yeah.
For some businesses, a bunch of files in a filing system is what they have, and that's fine. Some businesses can start to look at data lakes, data lake houses, data meshes, polyglot persistent, and all of that stuff. The right foundation is people. And you need to be honest with yourself about that, because it's too easy to try and transform your business based on something somebody read, and that doesn't work.
So your day-to-day work is very focused on AI systems or systems for industrial systems. With that insight of doing this day-to-day for a number of years now, where do you see the future of data and AI going, let's say in the next short term, but also then longer term?
So short term, I can talk about the kind of work that I'm doing at the moment. So I work on something known as Bonsai, which is an incubation within Microsoft Research. Bonsai is a combination of two things plus a bunch of technology.
Yep.
So the two things are machine teaching, which is a methodology for sharing subject matter expertise with the AI learning agent, and then a scale-out deep reinforcement learning platform. The combination of these two things is about getting over some of the challenges that deep reinforcement learning as a methodology within AI has. Now, these challenges are based on the way that agent needs to use data and the way the agent needs to learn to control a system. The control part is based on something called a simulation. Now, a simulation is a representation of what you're trying to control, and the data the agent uses is very fast interactions with that simulation. So we're abstracted from the world of big data. We're not talking about supervised learning and millions of rows turning into an algorithm that can recognize cats and dogs in images. But we're talking about data that needs to represent the working of a system. That needs to be turned into a simulation somehow, either from first principles or other things. Now, this is a big change that's happening in the short term, because to effectively use these technologies, you need subject matter expertise. The methodology of machine teaching is about telling a machine how to control a system and how to learn to do better. Now, there's a lot of different pieces in that, and that's kind of my point. In the short term, we're going through a tipping point where people are putting data in its place and going, we know what this can do now, and it's not everything. So the work that I'm involved in is going, okay, we need to do something else. We need simulations, we need subject matter expertise. If you extrapolate that into the long term, we'll still have technologies that are using large amounts of data. The results of that work will become more generally available. So the models that are produced will become more generalized. You'll be able to buy them per call through an API and those pieces. And the skills to work with that data will become more general. And I don't mean that more people will become data scientists. I mean that more technical skilled people will become more data literate. And more people across the business in non-technical roles will understand the roles that data has to play. Then different forms of AI will emerge. And when we're talking about learning agents that control a system, these are the kind of agents that will collaborate with people. It's not people curating the output from an algorithm. It's people who have a new team member who is telling them what could happen. And when I say it, it sounds quite grand in that way, but this is the kind of result you get from it. It says, based on what we've seen now, you should shut down that targeting group. Based on what we've seen and all the simulations I've practiced in, we can save energy by turning down the heating and ventilation at this point. Then you can either give it that control, or people can decide to take that as a piece of advice.
Do you think it will get to a point where people will feel comfortable enough to give those agents that level of control, that level of autonomy?
If we think about the examples I gave there, we're already seeing from your question, AI being allowed to set up and tear down targeting groups and those kind of things. We're already seeing AI allowed to produce text and people are learning to trust it there. If AI meant that the offices we worked in, the houses, the spaces we worked in were more comfortable taking less energy, then you'd want the AI to do that and you'd be quite happy. Do you want your car to be fully autonomous right now? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So what we'll find is there will be people who will be evaluating the application of that technology, which I admit sounds like a lot of things I've said before today, and will be deciding how we learn to trust it. Because in the far future, there will be self-driving vehicles and there will be a lot less traffic accidents than there are now. We have a trust boundary to get over
Yeah.
for something that will be quantifiably better based on the number of traffic accidents. That will happen all the way through your business.
Yeah.
You'll learn to trust new skills, you'll develop new tools and new capability, you'll develop the skills that mean your business can trust them. But you'll only do that by starting with the things that we talked about, which is, not trying to do too much too soon and focusing on nurturing the people you've got through these changes.
I guess that comes back to the whole thing is you're not going to know until you start.
Exactly.